The Aztecs have this wonderful migration story where they say that they came from a place well to the north.
The Aztecs were not living on an untouched continent when they built their temples. They arrived in a land already shaped by distant travelers. A genetic ghost has been discovered in the deep Amazon and ancient ruins that proves a global web of people existed long ago. This discovery is the smoking gun that proves the timeline of human history needs to be rewritten right now. The Aztecs were the guardians of a very old and very complex human story that science is only now starting to understand. DNA rewrites American history. Mainstream history has always claimed that the story of the Americas was a simple one. We were told that nearly 15,000 years ago, small groups of hunters followed mammoths across a frozen bridge of land connecting Siberia to Alaska. According to this old model, these people slowly moved south, generation after generation, until they filled up the entire continent. It was described as a slow and steady walk with no outside help and no surprises. But recent science has blown this idea apart. Scientists began looking at the DNA of ancient remains to see if the family tree actually matched the textbooks, and that is when the story broke. A team analyzing genetic markers found something that should have been impossible. They discovered a small but clear genetic trace in local groups that matched people from the other side of the planet. The closest match was not Siberia or East Asia. It was Aboriginal Australians and people from the islands of Melanesia. This genetic ghost is now called Signal Y, and it proves that at least one ancient group reached the Americas in a way that no one had ever considered. This means that while people in Europe were still figuring out basic tools, ancient mariners were already crossing the vast Pacific Ocean. The signal survived in places like the deep Amazon, but it vanished in others as if entire populations had been wiped out or replaced over time. This makes the rise of the Aztecs look very different. They were the final act of a long drama involving vanished ancestors and global travelers. The data is not just a guess, it is etched into the bones. The mystery of who the Aztecs really were has haunted historians because their rise to power was almost too fast to be real. In less than 200 years, they went from being outsiders to running a massive empire with engineered roads and a calendar more accurate than what was used in Europe. This sudden burst of high technology does not fit the slow climb we were told about. The secret in the blood suggests that the first people here were far more advanced than we ever imagined. Historians have struggled to explain how a city like Tenochtitlan could appear out of nowhere in such a short amount of time. By the time the Spanish arrived, the Aztec capital was larger than most European cities and featured complex systems for clean water and massive markets. The level of organization required to run an empire of millions of people hints at layers of influence that have been long forgotten. The official answer was always that they just borrowed ideas from the Maya. But it is not that simple. The DNA shows that the people themselves were moving and mixing in patterns that look more like a global web than a single path. This suggests that the knowledge of the Aztecs might have come from a much older shared source that once spanned the entire globe. The discovery of the Australasian signal in the Americas is the smoking gun that proves the sea was not a barrier to ancient people. If people could reach South America from Australia 15,000 years ago, then the entire timeline of history needs to be rewritten. This is exactly what alternative researchers have been saying for decades, and now the biology is starting to back it up. The Aztecs were the final result of a very long and very messy history of human movement. They were not just local farmers who decided to build an empire one day. They were the inheritors of a cultural legacy that stretches back into a time we are only now beginning to understand. This hidden history suggests that the Aztecs were part of a much bigger story involving lost civilizations. They were the masters of taking fragments of the past and turning them into something powerful. A massive trade network was already waiting for them when they stepped onto the island in the lake. Silent witness in the veins. The land that the Aztecs called home was a crossroads of trade and movement for thousands of years before the first stone of their capital was laid. Recent studies of DNA passed down through mothers showed that this region was a starting point for the entire hemisphere. Genetic lines from civilizations that came before the Aztecs show up in populations as far away as the very tip of South America. This means that the ideas and people of ancient Mexico were shaping the world thousands of miles away. When the Aztecs arrived in 1325, they stepped into a region that was already rich with history. Their empire did not just conquer lands, it reshaped the DNA of every person it ruled. But the real mystery lies in the fatherly lines, because the Y chromosomes of the earlier builders have almost completely disappeared. While the mother's line stayed alive, the father's lines from the earlier groups are mostly gone from the modern record. This hints at massive changes and violent replacements that happened long before the Spanish ever arrived. The continent was not a peaceful park. It was a place of constant change where new groups would arrive and sweep away the old leadership. The Aztecs were just the latest and most successful group to do this. They took the surviving maternal lines of the valley and blended them with their own strong traditions to create a new society. This genetic mixing reveals that the great cities of Mexico were like living laboratories of human connection. People and ideas flowed across the valleys like a massive network of information. The rise of the Aztecs was only possible because they inherited a system that was already working. What most people do not realize is just how far the Aztec influence actually reached across the map. One of the most shocking things scientists found was the sudden break in the male family lines of ancient cities. Entire lineages of fathers just stop in the record, usually right at the same time a city or civilization collapsed. In the great city of Teotihuacan, almost all the male lines were replaced right before the city fell. This suggests that the changes of power in the ancient world were much more intense than we thought. It was not just a change in government, it was a complete replacement of the people in charge. The women remained and carried the culture forward, but the men of the old world were erased. This pattern of disappearing fathers left a space that the Aztecs were happy to fill. When they arrived in the valley, they found a landscape that had been broken by these losses. Their own male ancestry was strong, which gave them a massive advantage over the groups that were already there. They merged their lines with the surviving local families and quickly became the dominant force. DNA shows that this was a deliberate strategy to build a new empire on the ruins of the old one. They were not just building temples, they were rebuilding the human population of Mexico. The disappearance of these male lines is one of the biggest mysteries in science today. It does not look like a slow fade over time. It looks like a sudden and rapid event that happened over and over. This tells us that the history of Mesoamerica was a cycle of high peaks and total collapses. Each time a civilization reached its limit, it would fall apart and a new group would step in to start the process again. The Aztecs were simply the last and most powerful version of this cycle. The genetic data acts as the final silent witness to the missing chapters that time tried to erase. Guardian of the Sun. While stone temples may eventually crumble into dust and sacred books were lost to history, the biological archive remains alive within the people. This data reveals a profound truth. The blood of the ancient builders is still moving through the world today. Their names may have been stripped from the monuments, but their essence stays in the cells of their descendants. The Aztecs were never a single isolated event in history. Instead, they served as the grand bridge between a deep, mysterious past and the world the Europeans found in the 16th century. They did not come out of nowhere. Instead, they were the final result of centuries of movement, a perfect mix of everything that had come before them. From the legendary Toltecs to the unknown architects of Teotihuacan, the Aztecs gathered the remnants of fallen empires and fused them into something new. They were a smart mix of survivors and conquerors whose heritage was a patchwork of the entire landscape. By looking at their DNA, we are finally seeing the real faces of the people who shaped the Americas. We are discovering that the collapse of these civilizations was never a total disappearance, but a change. This genetic story is one of toughness that survived through the most difficult times in history. Despite the devastation of diseases and warfare, the genetic blueprint stayed alive. It stayed hidden in plain sight, waiting for the technology of the future to unlock its secrets. Today, we recognize that history is not just found in the dirt or in old books. It is a living, breathing story. The story of the Americas is not a story of a lost people, but of a persistent one. Through the lens of DNA, we see that the ancient world never truly died. It simply changed form, flowing through the veins of millions who carry the legacy of the builders into the modern age. The missing pieces of the puzzle are finally starting to fall into place as we look closer. The final revelation from the DNA research is that the Aztecs were much more than just a powerful tribe. They were the intentional caretakers of a genetic and cultural legacy that reached across the entire planet, weaving together threads of humanity that we are only now beginning to untangle. The presence of the Australasian signal and the vanished fatherly lines found in the deepest layers of the record prove that the history of the Americas is a truly global story. We can no longer think of the New World as being a secluded island cut off from everyone else for thousands of years. Instead, it was a place of constant arrival, a destination for explorers and migrants who crossed vast oceans and icy bridges. It was a place of exchange where the best ideas from around the world were brought together to build something incredible. And the Aztecs were the final, most brilliant expression of that global connection. Their ability to organize a massive empire and dominate so quickly makes a great deal of sense when you stop seeing them as nomadic outsiders and start seeing them as the inheritors of an ancient system. They were not starting from scratch or stumbling blindly into the complexities of running a country. They were using a blueprint that had been perfected over thousands of years. From their complex laws to their advanced farming, everything about the Aztec state was part of a long tradition of human achievement. The DNA shows they were not just a single group, but the result of a massive merger of different peoples. They were the Sun Kings because they held the light of 1,000 years of history in their hands. This shifting perspective fundamentally changes the way we look at the ruins they left behind. When we stand before the ruins of the Great Temple or look at the beautiful statues of their gods, we are not looking at the art of a lost tribe. We are looking at the final chapter of a story that started on the other side of the ocean. The Aztecs were proud of their history and knew they were part of something special. Even though invaders tried to erase their records, the fundamental truth stayed hidden where no fire could reach it. No amount of destruction could wipe out the genetic record that the survivors carried forward. Today, that record is finally being read by scientists using tools that seem like magic. These researchers are finding themselves just as amazed as the Aztecs were by the greatness of their own origins. What do you think is the next big secret waiting to be found in our DNA? Should we keep digging into these ancient mysteries or let the past stay buried? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history.